Now, Togo's president, Faure Gnassingbé, who has been in power since 2005, has taken on a powerful new role as head of the Council of Ministers. This new position, which has no term limits, grants him sweeping executive powers. Now, the body now responsible for electing both the president and council head, Gnassingbé could remain in control for the foreseeable future. Opposition leaders and civil society call it a constitutional coup, arguing that it dismantles the foundations of democracy. It also puts power in one man's hands and extends the Gnassingbé family's rule. So when power keeps slipping further from the people's hands, how do they take it back? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Bakarr Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology in Northern Illinois University. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Bah.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I would love to hear your thoughts about, this new power that has been given to President Faure Gnassingbé. How do you interpret the fact that 89 out of 91 lawmakers approved the constitutional changes? What does such near unanimity, reflect?
Well, each time I hear high consensus in divisive political matters, 90% approval or something of that nature, I actually get very skeptical. Because in my mind, if something is really controversial, you will have a significant number of people who oppose it, even if the majority does. So the fact that you have such a huge, you have barely no opposition to such a thing, it means really it is actually not a credible process. I couldn't really imagine how you can get almost a near unanimity in extending somebody's rule almost indefinitely, somebody who has been there since 2005. So the short answer is that that is not really a credible process.
All right, now, in as much as it's not a credible process, critics have actually said that the parliamentary majority effectively rubber stamps Gnassingbé's power. So we also know that the UNIR party, holds 108 of the 113 parliamentary seats. So how does this supermajority also shape both policy making and also realistic checks left on executive power or execution power in Togo's system?
So I think we really have to go back to fundamentals because I think, that is what we have there on paper, and that is what we also have there as, the current configuration of power. But I think if you were to ask how did that configuration of power emerge to begin with, then you can really see that all of this, what is happening really here is just a continuation of what has been going on, and that is the rule of one person or the rule of a family. So really, in essence, really nothing has really changed here. You just have the same thing going on. And the unfortunate part of it is that it is just, I guess, giving it, giving more life, so to speak, or transforming from. But really, it is a continuation of the same thing. And what we had before in Togo, from a purely political, governance standpoint, wasn't a good thing. You cannot really have somebody rule indefinitely and have one, somebody's father and then somebody's son keep on ruling. If it is a monarchy, that's a different thing. But in monarchical systems, there are other ways in which monarchs are controlled and legitimacy is gained. So that would have been a different thing. But in this case, in a political system that is supposed to be a democratic one, be it a presidential or a parliamentary, this is just not right.
Okay. Now, the newly created presidency of the Council of Ministers carries no term limits at all. That means, and that's for the sake of those who don't even understand, and it means that Gnassingbé could rule until 2031 or even beyond. Meanwhile, opposition leaders have branded his appointment a constitutional coup. In your view, how is this different from the military coups, we've seen across West Africa in recent years, especially with, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, fresh in mind?
Yeah, Really, I mean, I don't make too much difference between power grabs by civilians and power grab by military people. I don't really make much difference on it. It's just, in essence, it's the same thing because in the case of Togo here, or where you have civilians who manipulate constitutions, in Cameroon, Togo, and many other countries in the region. Essentially, what you really have is that they have the backing of the military, and that happens through the system of packing the military with people of their choosing and supporters and ethnic allies. So you really end up whether you talk of actually a constitutional coup or a military coup, it's the same thing in the sense that it is an abuse of power and a power grab by a person or a clique of people. And it is really unfortunate because it leads in the same direction, and that is you will end up having authoritarian rule. Whether the person is in the uniform or not in the uniform, it's still the same thing.
Now, Dr. Bah, shifting from direct presidential elections to a parliamentary-only vote fundamentally alters voters' rights. I know you'd agree with me on that. But what legal precedents or even dangers does this raise? First of all, let's start with that.
So, countries, can always choose which kind of political systems, modalities work for them. And, all of these systems actually have their pros and cons, but I would just like to make 2 points. The one is that the way actually these things are supposed to happen, that is to say, the way countries choose political systems and forms of governance, normally it's supposed to actually happen through a deliberative process. Constitutional conferences, consultations, and those sort of things. And number 2, the form of government or the kind of government that actually a country selects somehow is supposed to actually be one that best addresses the political, social, and economic conditions of the country. In other words, you have to ask what political system will best help us achieve peace, stability, good governance, and so forth. To come back to the first question, the process, of selecting a form of governance, normally what that's really happened is that it should be a truly deliberative process that is inclusive, in which it is not just a problem of rubber stamping or coming from top down, but it has to be genuine. And I think what we see here in Congo, in Togo, all of this is just simply a show, because it is really not based on any inclusive deliberation. It is not actually based on any kind of like desire really to bring in a political system that actually addresses fundamental economic, social, and political grievances in the country. So it is, in a sense, it is just a way of actually changing clothes. It's just a way of changing, I guess, the trappings of the person who is in power from one to another. And really, I have to say, it is really unfortunate because, this should have actually been used as an opportunity to really be very creative and be honest and genuine about, inclusive governance. But of course, they can make an argument that, well, we're moving from presidential to parliamentary because parliamentary is this and whatnot. But we know that this is really not the intent here. The intent is simply just to keep us. So again, the question of really what form of governance, should really be tied to a genuine, desire to actually devise and develop a kind of political system that works for the country, not to really just simply an instrument of power grab.
All right. Now, while you've actually talked about the broader implications, especially, for the country, you've barely touched on, when it comes to political engagement, because we did talk about how it alters voters' rights and what it actually means for, the people of the country being able to choose their own presidents or who would actually rule them. But away from that, opposition coalition, is also boycotting parliament. And this is as a form of protest to these changes. How effective will this be? How effective will these boycotts be?
How what?
How effective will, the opposition coalition boycotting the parliament to protest the changes be? How effective will it be? And do you think that they intend to build both national and international pressure from outside the halls of power?
Right. So unfortunately, I mean, those things really will not be very effective. Again, I'm not saying that they should not do it. I think they should do it maybe. Again, that's their own political judgment. It's a form of protest. But it will not be effective. And again, I'll come back to the international aspect a little bit better. And the reason why it will not be effective is that we have to understand where does power lie in Togo and in similar countries. Power really doesn't lie in with the people, so to speak. It doesn't really lie with the institutions of parliament and so forth. It really lies with the military, and that is whoever controls, the weapons, the security forces. That's really where power lies. So, in as much as the person in power, has aligned the military to be, in line with what they want to do, you will see that whatever kinds of happens, through parliamentary action, protests and whatnot, in most cases it doesn't get, Togo has had this before, the violently suppressed demonstrations in the past. So it's unfortunate really that I think it doesn't tend to be very effective. The only really way where this can really be, as a protest action, can really be meaningful if you really have very, very strong and vibrant civil society and people really who are principled, people who are really willing to, stand up for right and have a prolonged civil, engagement or with mass support. But again, we don't see that in Togo, and because again ethnic divisions and other things, it is unlikely to happen. So the simple answer to your question is that all of those things will not really shift the way the regime thinks of things, because again it has military support and it is able to do other kinds of manipulations. To the question of international, again, we live in a context in which really international norms, especially around democracy, has been watered down a lot, not just within Africa, but also beyond. And also, of course, the climate that we have today is one that is less of kind of like interventionist in terms of promoting democracies across other countries. So I really don't see much, coming from international support that is going to be meaningful to change what is happening in Togo. Ultimately, I think it will be up to the Togolese people to mount a resistance, a civil-based resistance that is broad enough to actually force the regime to change it a little bit.
Okay, now let's focus on the youths a bit. Let's digress a bit. The new ceremonial presidency is held by a 68-year-old man, Jean-Lucien Savie-de-Tove. And, young people already see this transition as a continuity of authoritarianism. What message does this send to the over 60% of Togolese youths that are under 30? Do you think that these changes could also spark a surge in youth activism, or do you think that young people would give up on politics by letting apathy prevail?
So I think, there's a symbolic aspect to it on two levels. One, of course, it's a very old person, suddenly, the person's understanding or connection to the youth will be far much more, smaller. But I think the youth also understand that this is not really the person who has power. So I think, they know that, power has actually, stays in the same person. Now, what this actually does, I guess the continuation of authoritarianism, what that actually does to the youth, I mean, I think really it's going to play in two ways. The one, of course, is the kind of economic and social issues which authoritarian regimes tend to, breed and aggravate. And to the extent that, economic and social conditions do not improve, you will see continued youth, disgruntlement. What they can really do, again, many African youths have, adjusted by migrating or, engaging in livelihood generating activities, so to speak. But I think you really need serious and principled leaders, civil society leaders, to really mobilize the youth in a way that actually the government or people in power will listen. And I emphasize the idea of principled people, because when you have people who are just there to be appointed to some kind of position or to be co-opted into power, that doesn't really lead to fundamental civil society changes. You really need people who stand for principles and do that. The other element, again, in African politics is that is always salient there, and in case Togo here too, the youth too can actually always be manipulated by ethnicity. It's clear in Togo too. I mean, there's an ethnic political dimension between northerners and north and south. I mean, so even and the Kagi people. So the youth can also be really victims of that. And youth mobilization, youth resistance, kind of like is contingent both on those ethnic factors, but also the economic manipulations and to some degree the lack of really principled leaders, civil society leaders.
Okay. Now, Dr. Bah, you did talk about the international pressure not doing too much in Togo, but we'll talk about that after this particular question that I have for you. That's the protest that actually happened after the law was passed. Reports actually described the rally that it happened last weekend in Lomé as modestly attended but full of conviction. And I understand where you talked about the youth might be manipulated as well. But how impactful do you think that smaller, persistent demonstrations can be in shifting policy?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think they have to do this thing, because if you don't, it just creates the impression that, well, everything is fine. So and this is really for the opposition to engage in. But also I think they have to come. The opposition again have to come up with meaningful and honest and creative solutions to the country's problem. And again, I don't mean in terms of like economic management and those, or just, replacing one government with another government. But I think you have to, maybe you can begin to ask, why has actually one family, one person and his father ruled the country for so long? What is the basis of that? Where is the support coming from? Is it an ethnic support? And what are the concerns of those people? That is that ethnic group or whatnot. And I think if you begin from those kinds of questions, then as a people you can ask, okay, well, how can we actually have a political system that accommodates the interests of those constituencies and also the other people? What I'm saying is that simply you have to think of a political system that accommodates the interests of the various ethnic groups. Because ultimately in Togo and many other African countries, deep down, politics is an ethnic thing. Whether you see it or not, but it's the primary driver of the way people, vote, or even if there's no votes, the way they support. So I think I will, say that the opposition really has to come up with, a more thoughtful way to address the problem, and from there they can move forward. Again, I'm not trying to put the burden on the opposition or excuse the regime.
Okay, so how about putting the burden on ECOWAS or the African Union? What responsibilities do these regional bodies, have when member states creatively engineer indefinite rule through legal maneuvers?
Yeah, Yeah, so we have to ask, who is ECOWAS? I mean, who are the countries that are there? And I mean, ECOWAS is comprised of various countries, and if you begin to look at each one of those countries, there's very few of them that actually have meaningful democratic systems. So in a sense, I mean, really, most of them are not in a place to even talk, any serious talk. Most of the countries within ECOWAS, the presidents themselves or the governments that they themselves actually came in through some kind of manipulative elections or disputed elections. So I think as a body, as a body, I mean, I think it is really difficult for for either ECOWAS or AU to make any impact, because on the one hand, the agents or the actors or the leaders within those institutions, they themselves actually face similar kinds of problems in their own countries. But also, number two, the context in which we are seeing international and regional relations, countries can just decide to ignore them. And I mean, we saw in Niger, I mean, like the threat of, okay, well, there's going to be a war in Niger, but those things are not really realistic. So, I mean, this is hard to say, but the truth of the matter is that the solutions to these kinds of problems largely lies within the people in their countries. They have to solve their problems themselves.
Okay, talking about solving their problems, you also talked about, the Congress might decide to ignore some of these regional bodies. But what about the people themselves? Because it looks like this is actually what is happening to the citizens themselves. I mean, beyond elections, are we seeing a broader squeeze on civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, or even freedom of the press? And since we actually foresee tighter controls, what grassroots or digital strategies would actually keep these citizens engaged and informed?
Mm-hmm. So authoritarian regimes, particularly in Africa, I mean, they tend to take two kinds of forms. The one form is one in which you have, a government, a person in power, and their interest is mostly to stay in power and engage in corrupt forms of governance. And as long as really people don't seriously challenge their power, they don't really trouble or they don't bother with most of the people. In other words, you can actually have large levels of civil liberties or liberties in a country that is authoritarian, in the sense that for the vast majority of people who are not involved in politics, the government has nothing to do with you. And if the elite or opposition people get co-opted into the system, they don't oppose, you wouldn't really have mass civil rights violations. Now, I'm not saying that is good. That is actually not good, because essentially it perpetuates the politics of corruption, the politics of elite rule and abusing resources and so forth. The other scenario is when people begin to resist, and then whether it's based on ethnic or regional or any kind of form of resistance, and that is then where you begin to see, violations of civil liberties and heavy-handed tactics. For example, when you have demonstrations, violent crackdown on demonstrations or arresting of people. So I think it really depends on how, whether you actually have some kind of challenge to the regime, which the regime takes as a threat, or whether actually just people leave the regime and do their thing and then they follow their business. So in that sense, you don't have mass human rights violations.
All right. Now, Dr. Bah, we're actually winding down, and you did say that the Gnassingbé family has actually ruled Togo for 57 years now. From your expert's point of view, what impact does such dynastic continuity have on public trust, institutional resilience, and also on governance?
Yeah, the stability. I mean, in relative terms, I mean, Togo has been much more stable than most, many other countries in the region. And you have had this long rule of people, of the family there. The legitimacy of it, I think it's always really, it depends on which group you're talking of. I think if you talk to the people who are, from the ethnic base, the Kabylie and supporters, they will have their legitimacy. Of course, among the Igwe and other people, they wouldn't. So let me say two things here. I think on the face of it, it may look like, okay, well, this kind of law brings stability and, you don't have civil wars and so forth, and which is true. But it just perpetuates a system of, corrupt rules. Even when the leaders are able administrators, somehow it doesn't really provide meaningful progress for the country. And I think this is where I fear the existence of these kind of like, low-level authoritarian regimes. They are not very, very repressive, but I mean, power is in one person. Now, to just give you a comparison, I mean, you do have, of course, in monarchical systems where you do have, dynasties rule for ages. I mean, we have these things in the Middle East and so forth, and even North Africa. But I think it's important that people don't confound the way monarchical systems work and these dynastic kind of powers. Again, not to go into too much details here, but many of the countries that actually have real monarchical systems, the monarchies are far much more representative of the country than it seems on the face of it. They have meaningful systems of checks and balances that also generate legitimacy. So again, I'm not trying to praise monarchies, but what I'm just pointing to is that the monarchical regimes that systems that you find, they have a different forms of legitimacy and being responsible, as opposed to these authoritarian regimes that largely relies on control of a military and some kind of ethnic alliance to stay in power. So to go back to your basic question, I think this is really not good for Togo. It provides superficial stability, but it cannot really be the basis for advancing a country.
All right, now, while we wrap up, we'd love to have your final thoughts, but also speaking on monarchical system, what possible scenarios feel plausible in negotiated reform, a mass uprising, or simply, the status quo, and why?
Right. Well, my fear is that the status quo will prevail, and the reason why is simply because there is control over the military, because ultimately it's about the military. So I think that's the way this will continue to go in. I mean, if it has gone on like this for 50 years, maybe it will go on for a little bit longer. I think what would really be much more ideal, is really for the Togolese people, to have a meaningful discussion around the different ethnicities, levels of power, groups, and they really ask a very basic question, and that is, how can they create a country that is much more inclusive? Now, they are moving towards a parliamentary system. I mean, they have, a parliamentary system that is wonderful. Maybe that's one way. But can they really think of actually ways in which, a parliamentary system, creates more regional and ethnic inclusion, as opposed to really concentrating power in, the president of the council or a prime minister, so to speak. Okay. So I think, to me, I mean, that's really what I would love to see. And I guess the Togolese should take this. The government will present this exercise as institutional reform. I would want them to actually take a step further, and that is, let them think of creative institutional reforms with a genuine goal of actually producing an inclusive political system. So that's really my hope.
All right.
But I guess we should see.
Yeah, we'll definitely wait and see. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bakarr Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Have a nice day.
It's a pleasure.